On October 14th, a United States Forest Service ranger named Dale Ostrowski drove 4.5 hours up a service road into the northern Cascade backcountry to perform a welfare check. The extraction window had been 3 days prior. Nobody had come out. Dale had done welfare checks before. Crews missed their windows for all kinds of reasons: equipment trouble, weather, a twisted ankle that slows the whole team down. He was not alarmed on the drive up. He had a thermos of coffee and a clipboard, and he figured to be back on shift by 6 the next morning. He found the trucks first, both of them parked exactly where the team had left them 10 days before. Keys in the ignition of the lead vehicle. The second truck had a fresh cup of coffee sitting on the passenger seat, still faintly warm when Dale pressed his hand to the side of it. He stood there for a moment with his hand against that cup, and then he took it away. The camp was 40 meters up the trailhead. All 6 tents were standing. All the gear was accounted for. The stove was cold, but there was a pot on it with the remnants of a morning meal. Oatmeal with brown sugar, the kind that forms a crust when it sits undisturbed. He unzipped the main sleeping tent. All 6 sleeping bags were laid out side by side. Each one was zipped shut. Each one had the shape of a body pressed into it. The weight of a person distributed across the full length of the bag. The fabric slightly compressed at the shoulder, the hip, the feet. Personal impressions in the fill, the way a bag looks after years of use by the same body. Every bag was empty. Dale Ostrowski zipped the tent closed. He walked back to his truck at a pace he would later describe to the deputies as calm, though he could not remember his own footsteps. He drove down the mountain without calling it in. He sat in the parking lot of a gas station off Route 20 for approximately 40 minutes. Then he drove back up the following morning with 2 deputies from the Chelan County Sheriff's Office. The official search lasted 11 days. 4 bodies were recovered. Each one was found in an open clearing positioned on the back, arms crossed at the chest. The clearings were between 3 and 7 miles from base camp, in directions that made no geographic sense relative to the trail system. One member of the crew was never found. The official cause was listed as equipment malfunction resulting in exposure, with 1 fatality attributed to blunt force trauma consistent with a vehicle accident. Nobody in the official report mentions the positioning of the bodies. Nobody mentions the prints. Nobody mentions what was carved into the door frame of the tent. The case is closed. The insurance paid out. The Stelako Ridge trail system has been listed as closed pending land reclassification for the past 3 years. Listen closely. My name is not important. What is important is that I worked search and rescue in the Pacific Northwest for 11 years. 8 of them in the Cascade Range sector, out of the Wenatchee field office. I have pulled people out of situations that should have killed them. I have also arrived at situations where there was nothing left to pull out. I know the difference between what the wilderness does to people and what something else does to people. That difference exists. It is real. I am not going to ask you to believe me. I am going to tell you what happened and let you do what you want with it. I am one of 2 people who came out of Stelako Ridge alive. I have not spoken publicly about any of this until now. I am making this recording because a new crew filed a trail access permit for the Stelako Ridge corridor last month. The permit was approved. I was not consulted. I have not been able to reach anyone at the permit office who will return my call. So I am doing the only thing left to me, which is this. If you are watching this, and you know someone who is planning to go into that trail system, please make sure they hear what I am about to tell you, please. There were 6 of us. The mission was a route assessment of a newly mapped backcountry corridor in the Stelako Ridge system, a stretch of high alpine terrain flagged for possible inclusion in an expanded SAR coverage zone. 10 days in, Map the terrain, document conditions, flag technical sections, come home. I had been on dozens of missions like it. I want to describe the crew to you because I think it matters. Not the way it matters in a story, where you describe people so that their deaths feel earned. It matters because these were real people, and I want you to understand exactly what was lost. Marcus Webb was our medic. He had been with the Wenatchee field office for 6 years, longer than anyone else on the team. He had a ritual every morning without exception. 2 cups of coffee before any briefing, before any equipment check, before he would even look at the day's route plan. He brewed it himself on a small camp percolator he carried in a dedicated dry bag, a yellow one that he had owned for at least as long as I had known him. He said the ritual kept him human. I thought it was an endearing quirk. By the 3rd day out, it was the most normal thing in the world. You heard the percolator, you knew the day was starting, everything was fine. Diane Cho ran communications. 12 years in the field, formerly with the King County SAR unit before transferring south to Wenatchee. Diane had never, in 12 years of field operations, missed a scheduled check-in window. Not once. Not in bad weather, not with damaged equipment, not when she was sick. I used to tease her about it, told her the radios would survive without her hovering over them. She smiled each time and did not change anything about her routine. Pete Salas was our equipment lead. Pete ran every piece of gear on a fixed maintenance rotation, regardless of how much use it had seen. He serviced equipment on its scheduled day whether it had been used or not, whether it needed it or not. He carried a small waterproof notebook that he called his ledger, where he logged every service, every fuel reading, every mileage mark, every anomaly however small. I watched him write in that ledger the way some people check their pulse, steady, automatic. A kind of reassurance. Renat Taft was a field botanist brought on contract to document the flora along the new corridor. She was not a SAR officer, but she had done enough remote field work that she moved through backcountry terrain with the efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that hesitation costs. She was a scientist first and she thought like one, which meant she documented things before she interpreted them. She also finished every meal before anyone else at the table and apologized for it every single time. As if the speed were a habit she had been trying to break for years. Cal Briggs was the skeptic. 15 years as a structural engineer before he transitioned into field assessment consulting. Cal needed a physical explanation for everything he observed. Not because he was difficult or closed-minded, because his mind genuinely could not rest until it had filed an observation into a category it recognized. In the field, that quality is more useful than people who are not engineers tend to understand. Cal had talked more than one crew out of bad decisions by insisting on structural explanations before emotional ones. He was the most grounding person on a team when the categories were available. I did not fully understand until later what happens to a mind like his when the categories stop working. We drove up to the Stelako trailhead on the morning of October 4th. The access road was rough, rutted from autumn rains, and the lead truck ran hot for the last 20 minutes of the climb but held. We made base camp by early afternoon, got the tents up, got the stove going. And Marcus brewed 2 unnecessary cups of coffee at 4 in the afternoon for no reason, except that he felt like it. And nobody objected, because the smell of it was one of the better things about the first day. I want to tell you about the trail signs before I go any further. They are the subject of this recording, and I want you to understand precisely what we knew about them and what we chose to do with what we knew. There are 3 markers at the upper entry point of the Stelako Ridge corridor. They are old. Older than the trail designation, older than the Forest Service maps, older than the assessment grids. They are carved wooden posts, each standing approximately to the height of a man's chest. set in the ground at the points of a rough triangle across the trail width. Each one carries the same symbol, a circle with 3 lines descending from it at angles, like roots from a seed, or fingers opening from a closed palm, or something else entirely that I have not been able to name precisely in 3 years of trying. Our pre-mission briefing had included a note from a tribal land coordinator at the Chelan County Planning Office. The note said the markers were associated with traditional Lekwungen land use practices. It said crews should treat the area beyond the markers as a culturally sensitive zone and conduct themselves accordingly. It said the signs should be understood to indicate that the area beyond was not for camping. Cal read the note twice. He folded it carefully and set it on the dash of the lead truck. He said the markers most likely delineated the boundary of a cultural preserve, probably associated with a seasonal resource gathering area. He said our assessment work fell well within the scope of permitted non-destructive use. He said it with the calm certainty of someone classifying a structural load. Every one of us nodded. We passed the markers and continued up the trail. I have replayed that moment in my memory more times than I can tell you. The first 3 days were exactly what 10 days in the backcountry are supposed to be. Good weather, hard work, long evenings with the stove going and everyone sorting data, or maintaining gear, or doing the quiet reading that only happens when you are far enough from the world that the world stops interrupting. Marcus brewed his coffee each morning. Diane made her check-ins without fail. Pete worked through his maintenance rotation and filled his ledger with neat, small handwriting. Renee cataloged specimens each evening by headlamp, laying out her reference sheets on the floor of her tent and comparing them with the photographs from the day. We ran our GPS waypoints. We flagged the technical sections along the eastern approach to the upper ridge. We noted the condition of the existing trail markers. We ate well. We slept. The rhythm of it was genuinely comfortable. I want you to understand that. Not forced comfort, not the deliberate effort to seem normal when things feel off. Actually comfortable. The kind of ease that builds when 6 people who know their work are doing their work in terrain that is hard but familiar. We had all been in worse places, doing more difficult things. Stelako Ridge, those first 3 days, felt like a straightforward assignment. On the afternoon of the second day, Pete came back from a solo run down to the lower trail junction, where he had gone to check the condition of the secondary access markers. He stopped at the equipment cache and began writing in his ledger. He mentioned, in the same tone he used to note a tire pressure reading, that one of the 3 entry markers had been repositioned. It was facing inward now, toward camp. He said he had reset it to its original outward-facing position and logged the observation under site modifications. Renee looked up from her specimen sheets and said it might have been wind. Cal said the post base was probably loose after the autumn rains. I wrote it in my own notes. A single line. I read that line now and it looks like every other line around it. Medium pen pressure. No particular urgency, just a thing I noted and moved past. On the morning of the 3rd day, Marcus came out of the tent with his first cup of coffee and stood looking at the tree line for a while without drinking. Then he said the birds were gone. He specified not quieter. Gone. The morning that had opened with full birdsong on days 1 and 2 was silent in a way that was not a matter of degree. Cal said a pressure front was likely moving in from the northwest. He said birds frequently went quiet 12 to 18 hours ahead of significant weather events. The sky was clear. The forecast we had pulled before departure showed stable conditions through day 6. Cal's explanation was there, and it was available and we took it. On the morning of the 4th day, Renee found the perimeter. She had gone out before full light to photograph a specimen she had spotted the previous evening. A variety of ground fern she did not have a reference shot of. She called out from about 30 meters away. Not alarmed, curious. The way she called when she wanted someone to come look at something interesting. By the time the rest of us reached her, the light was up enough to see it without headlamps. It circled the entire camp. A ring of flattened vegetation, pressed uniformly down in a consistent band, approximately 2 feet wide, running in a clean arc around the full circumference of the site. It was as even on the north side as the south, as even behind the equipment cache as in front of the tent row. Renat estimated the radius at 42 feet before she measured it. She measured it in 3 separate locations using her field tape. She got 41.8 feet, 42.3 feet, and 42 feet even. The consistency was what made Cal go quiet for a moment before he spoke. He said it was a herd of elk. He said large animals were sometimes drawn to campsites by food smell, and that circling behavior was documented in ungulate populations when predators were active in the area. He said the stride interval was unusual, but that stressed elk moved in atypical patterns when they felt cornered or flanked. Renat photographed every section of the perimeter. She went through an entire memory card. Then she measured the impressions themselves, 14 inches in diameter. Irregular stride interval, no claw marks, no dew claw impressions. No pattern of movement consistent with any ungulate she had reference data for. She said this carefully and factually. She said it like she was noting a discrepancy in a dataset and expected someone else to resolve it. Cal's explanation was almost correct. I am confident he believed it when he offered it. I am also confident that some part of him knew it was almost correct, and that the gap between almost and fully was one he could not look at directly. That evening I called a vote. I said I thought we should consider ending the assessment 2 days early, citing the unexplained perimeter evidence and the communication anomaly from the second day, which was what I called Pete's observation about the reposition marker in the meeting. I used the formal language you use when you are trying to make a feeling sound like a procedure. Diane voted to leave with me. Marcus, Pete, Cal, and Renat voted to continue. Cal said the perimeter was consistent with known wildlife behavior. Marcus said we were 2 days from completing the highest priority waypoints, and that incomplete data would mean a second mission anyway. Pete said nothing during the vote, only wrote something in his ledger when the count was done. I wrote the result in my notes, 4-2, continue. The night of the 4th day passed without incident. The 5th day, Renat located the perimeter again as part of her morning specimen run. She called the measurement back from the field tape, 31 feet, on all 3 sample points. Nobody called for a second vote. On the morning of the 6th day, Diane reached into the locked equipment case for the satellite communicator, and it was not there. The case had been locked. The lock was intact, its shackle fully engaged, the combination wheel untouched. The lid was open. Pete ran a full inventory of the surrounding area, while Diane and I checked the perimeter of the camp and the lower trail approach. Nothing. The unit had not been dropped or misplaced. It was the largest piece of equipment in the case. A bright orange housing the size of a hardback book. It was gone. Pete went for the backup, a secondary radio he kept in a dedicated yellow dry bag, separate from the main cache, in the side pocket of his personal pack. He found the dry bag open. He found the radio on a flat rock 31 feet from the eastern edge of camp, which was the same distance as the previous night's perimeter measurement. I noticed this only later, looking at Pete's ledger. The radio had been disassembled. Every component laid out in a row across the surface of the rock. In the exact sequence, they would be separated during a standard field strip, power source, antenna coupling, frequency module, speaker assembly, everything present, nothing damaged. The radio had been taken apart, and arranged by someone who knew what they were doing. Pete stood over it for a long time without speaking. Then he knelt and began reassembling it. His hands were steady. He got the unit back together in about 8 minutes and powered it on. It worked, but the bands we needed for the scheduled check-in were outside its range under that canopy. And no emergency frequency would hold through the tree cover. Diane did not make her check in that day. For the first time in 12 years. She sat for a while after she confirmed the radio would not reach anyone. She sat very still and did not say anything. Then she got up and began organizing the communication equipment log, documenting everything that had been found and how, in the same format she used for every other log entry. Precise and clear and in order, that afternoon. Renee said she wanted to photograph a specimen at a granite outcrop she had spotted from the main trail. A clump of something she had not been able to identify, growing in the shadow of the rock face about 20 meters into the tree line. 20 meters. I was standing at the edge of the trail. I watched her go. I watched her reach the rock face. I watched her kneel and take out her camera. I looked away for what felt like a short time. Not long. I was checking something on the route map. When I looked back up, she was not there. We searched for 4 hours. We called her name until the calling itself felt wrong. Until the sound of it bouncing back unanswered from the tree line felt like it was doing more harm than good. We found her field notebook on the ground near the outcrop, open to a blank page. Her boot impressions in the soft ground beside the rock led to a point and stopped. The right boot down, the left boot not. No drag marks in the surrounding soil. No disturbance of the undergrowth beyond her own approach path. A stride that stopped. That night the 6 of us became 5. And we made a decision that none of us stated out loud, but all of us understood. Nobody went anywhere alone. Not to the latrine, not to the water source. Not to the equipment cache 10 meters from the tent row. Everything in pairs, everything. It slowed us down, and we did not discuss slowing down as a problem. Cal did not offer an explanation for what had happened to Renee. He sat outside the tent entrance after dark with his headlamp switched off and said nothing until I asked him to come inside. On the 7th day, the paired movement accomplished almost nothing in terms of assessment work. We covered less than half our planned ground and documented almost none of it usefully. What I remember most is the sound of Pete's pen in his ledger, moving steadily across the page even when there was nothing to record except the absence of what had been there before. That evening, Pete showed me the perimeter measurement he had taken before we moved out that morning, 17 feet. He turned the ledger toward me and pointed at the number without looking at me, and then put the ledger away. I lay awake a long time that 7th night. Longer than any of the others. I noticed that the sounds in the surrounding darkness were different from the nights before. The previous nights, the movement around camp had been circular. Consistent, a steady presence rotating around the full perimeter. That night, the sounds were at the edges of where the paired groupings had moved during the day. The points where our pairing had created gaps and slowed the access, testing those gaps. It had watched us change our behavior, and it was changing its. On the morning of the 8th day, we decided to leave. No vote, no discussion. We broke camp in less than an hour. Pete moved through his shutdown checklist in real time, calling items off the list and crossing them in his ledger. The same routine he ran at the end of every mission, only faster. Diane secured the communication logs in the document case. I pulled the tent stakes myself, while Cal and Marcus handled the equipment cache. We moved. The descent road began 200 meters from camp. Pete brought the lead truck around and we loaded in, and Pete put it in gear, and for about 90 seconds everything felt like getting out. We reached the exit trail junction at 9:47 in the morning. The road was blocked. Not by fallen timber, not by a washout or a rock slide or any of the things that block mountain roads. Across the road, driven vertically into the earth at close, even intervals, was a series of wooden stakes. They were thick, the diameter of a man's forearm, and they had been driven deep into the ground. When Pete got out and grabbed the first one with both hands and leaned his full weight back, it did not shift. They were set in a pattern, a circle, 3 lines descending from it at angles. Pete turned around and looked at me through the windshield. Then he looked at the stakes and then back at me. He said quietly, without moving his eyes from mine, "It matches the signs." Nobody spoke after that. We used entrenching tools and the tow cable from the front winch. It took the 4 of us working together over an hour to clear enough of the road to move the vehicle through. The stakes were deep. Whoever or whatever had driven them had done so over multiple nights, working a section at a time, in the dark. While we slept 30 meters away, believing the sounds we heard were an animal maintaining a perimeter, while we thought it was only watching. It had been building the barrier we would find when we tried to run. We drove the truck back to camp for the remaining gear. Cal walked the camp boundary while Pete and I loaded. I noticed Pete glancing toward the entry trail repeatedly. He did not say what he was looking at. I followed his line of sight, and then I saw it too. The 3 carved entry markers had been moved. They were no longer at the trail entry. They had been repositioned during the night, placed along the camp perimeter. Each one oriented in the same direction, facing the blocked road section, pointing at the way out. I wrote this in my notes, and I did not say it out loud. We finished loading. We ate something quickly. We checked the vehicle. Pete went through the engine checks from his ledger one more time, methodically, each item in order. Marcus's camp percolator was sitting outside the tent entrance, packed in its yellow dry bag, ready for morning. He said he had run out of coffee on day 9. He said it with a half smile, the way he always said things that were mildly unfortunate. He said he would hit the diner on the way back down and have a proper cup. He said this as if it were already arranged, as if the diner were already in sight. We planned to leave at first light. We turned in early. I do not know what time it was when I came fully awake. Late, the camp sounds had been quiet for over an hour, which had developed its own specific quality by then. The quality of something that is not absent but is not moving, the tent wall depressed inward. A single point of contact in the fabric above the area where Marcus was sleeping. Something outside pressing one long contact point against the material. Deliberate. Patient, the fabric yielded slowly. The zipper on the tent door began to move, from the outside. It moved in the slow, careful way of something that has learned how the mechanism works. Not forcing, drawing the pull tab along the track. I heard Marcus shift. I heard him take one breath. He said one word. Wait, then nothing. Cal and I were 2 meters away. We were both awake. We were both sitting up in our bags in the dark. We did not open the tent. I have spent 3 years trying to explain that to myself, and I am not able to. I can tell you the physical facts of it. We were trained officers, both of us. I can tell you we were not paralyzed with fear in any way I could have named in the moment. I can tell you that what I felt was closer to an understanding. A sudden and complete understanding that the tent was not a barrier anymore, and had not been for some time. And that opening it would not save Marcus, and would cost us what we still had. I do not know if that understanding was right. I do not know if anything would have been different. I have carried it regardless. In the morning, Marcus's tent was empty. His sleeping bag was zipped. The pull tab was on the exterior. His coffee percolator was gone from the dry bag beside the entrance. Cal sat on the equipment case in the gray, early light and said, "It knew we would try to leave yesterday." That was all he said. I did not ask him to say more. We left at first light on the 10th day, 4 of us in the truck. 1 vehicle fully loaded. 1 fractured team with 1 seat empty, where Marcus had always sat and adjusted the side mirror and complained about the angle of it. Pete drove. The descent road ran 3 miles of switchbacks down through increasingly dense canopy before it joined the main access route. Headlights on from the moment we pulled out of camp because the road was dark under the trees, even in early morning. Pete drove carefully. The road was still rough from where we had worked through the stake barrier. And he navigated each section without speaking. The truck held. The engine temperature stayed steady. Everything was functioning. We were 3 miles down. Pete hit the brakes and the truck stopped. Something was standing in the center of the road. I'm going to tell you exactly what I saw. I am going to give you dimensions, and I am going to give you behavior, and I am not going to tell you what. It was because I do not have a category for it, and I learned from Cal what happens when a mind insists on filing a thing into a category that does not fit. Height. There is a standard Forest Service trail distance marker nailed to a tree on the left side of that road at a point I can identify on the route map. I know the standard height is 6 feet. The thing in the road was visibly and substantially taller than that marker when I positioned the 2 images in my memory against each other. 9 feet is my estimate. It may have been more. Arms. The hands ended below the knee when the arms were at rest. Shoulders wider than the front of the truck. Head set low close to the body, as if the neck were compressed or absent, or as if it were not a separate structure. It was standing in the center of the road. It was not moving. When our headlights reached it, it turned its head toward us. A slow, deliberate turn, the way you turn toward something you have been waiting for. Then it stood still, patient. Pete said something I did not hear clearly. He put the truck into gear. He floored it. I do not second-guess Pete. I have thought about what else there was to do in that moment, and I do not have an answer. He made a decision, and he acted on it, and I would not change my judgment of him for anything that came after the impact. The front of the vehicle made contact. The truck lifted, driver's side first. A vertical force from below the front axle. The vehicle rotated. I was against the door and then against the ceiling, and then the ceiling was the ground, and everything was wrong, and we hit the embankment at speed, and the world stopped with a sound I still hear sometimes in quiet rooms. I was on my back against the passenger door, which was now the lowest surface. The windshield was gone. Diane was beside me with blood running from a cut along her forehead. She was conscious. She was saying my name and telling me to move. Cal was in the back seat, upright, eyes open, breathing, not responding to his name. Pete. Pete was not in the vehicle. We searched in the dark with 2 headlamps for 20 minutes. We found blood on the road surface east of the crash site. We found one of his boots 15 feet into the tree line. We did not find Pete. We walked out. 3 miles. Diane with one hand pressed to the cut on her forehead. Me with a fracture in my left wrist I did not know about yet. Cal between us, walking steadily. Eyes fixed at a point slightly above the horizon. Not responding when I said his name, but not stopping either. They followed us out. At the distance the perimeter had started at, 42 feet. Consistent on both sides of the road, pacing us exactly, not gaining, not falling back. I heard them in the tree line. More than one. I did not count, I did not look. When we reached the point where the service road broke out of the canopy, and the sky opened in the early gray of pre-dawn, they stopped. They did not come any further. I do not know if it was the light, or if they had already finished what they came to do. We walked another mile to the ranger station. Diane knocked on the door. When it opened, I sat down on the step and did not get up again for a while. The search lasted 11 days. I have told you what was found. I have not told you everything about how they were found. Marcus was located 4 miles northeast of camp, in a clearing that appears on no Forest Service map. He was on his back, his arms were crossed at his chest. There was no physical trauma. The coroner listed exposure. Renee was found 6 miles to the northeast, a different clearing on her back, arms crossed. Based on the coroner's estimate, she had been there since the 6th day. Since the afternoon, she walked 20 meters off the trail to photograph a specimen, and her footprint stopped mid-stride. Cal died at Cascade Valley Hospital 11 days after the crash. He never regained full coherence. He spent those 11 days asking the nursing staff, repeatedly and quietly, whether the doors in his room were facing inward or outward. When staff asked him why that mattered, he said he was trying to determine if he was still inside the boundary. Pete was never found. The official report includes a line about partial material recovery near the crash site consistent with human remains. The determination of that material belonging to Pete was made on the basis of his medical records. I have never been given more detail than that. 4 bodies, arms crossed. Miles apart, miles from camp, each one in a clearing with no name on any map. Official cause: equipment malfunction, exposure, 1 vehicle accident fatality. Nobody in that report mentions the body positioning. Nobody mentions the 14-inch impressions found in the soil around each clearing. The same irregular stride interval we had measured every morning at camp. Nobody mentions the door frame. Ranger Dale Ostrowski, when he returned on October 15th with the deputies, found the entry flap of the main sleeping tent open. The wooden door frame section, the short section of frame into which the zipper anchor was set, had something carved into it. The carving was not there when we assembled the tent on day 1. I know this because Pete logged tent assembly in his ledger with a condition note, all surfaces nominal. I was asked once by a Chelan County investigator named Torres whether I had observed the 3 trail markers at the entry point of the Stelako Ridge corridor. I said yes. He wrote something on his notepad and closed it. That was the only question. He asked me about the markers. I looked up the word afterward, the Lekwungen word from the land coordinator's note, the one that had been translated in our briefing as meaning "do not camp." I called the Tribal Heritage Office in Victoria. A woman there listened to me, read the word from the briefing document. She was quiet for a moment. She said the word did not mean "do not camp." She said the closest translation into English was something like "they have already seen you." She said the markers were not warnings to people approaching the territory. She said the markers were records, documentation that something within that territory had already noted the presence of those who passed the threshold. I asked her how old the markers were. She said she did not know. She said her grandmother's grandmother spoke of them as old things. I did not sleep for 3 days after that call. I have not slept well since. I have not entered a forest since October of that year. I do not own a sleeping bag. I will not sleep in a tent. I do not go further than 50 feet from a lit building after dark. I am aware that this has changed my life substantially. I am aware of how it sounds. I have also stood at the tree line of a descent road in the dark and heard something moving at a fixed distance behind me that knew exactly when to stop, and I find I care less about how things sound than I used to. I will not tell you what was carved into the door frame of the tent. I decided that when I began this recording, and I am keeping it. There are things that once described cannot be undescribed. I am trying to protect whatever small thing I can still protect. I will tell you what the word means, the one carved into the frame. I asked the woman at the Heritage Office about it before I ended the call. She recognized it. She was quiet for a longer time than before. She said it was the same word as the markers. They have already seen you. The permit for the Stelako Ridge Trail System was approved for the first week of October. I made this recording on the 3rd of October. I do not know if that crew has left yet. I do not know if there is still time for anyone to reach them. The markers are still there. The corridor is still listed on the access permit database. And whatever learned our schedule, whatever cleared our communications in a single targeted night, whatever built a barrier across our exit road over the course of 10 days while we slept 30 meters away, whatever moved the entry markers to point us toward the road it had already blocked, whatever stood in that road and turned its head when the headlights found it, it has had 3 years of quiet. And the permit office just approved a crew for the first week of October, and I cannot get anyone to return my call. And I do not know how many times this has happened before us, or what gets filed where, or why nobody in the Chelan County system will say the word Stelako to me directly. It was not hunting us, it was removing us. The way you remove anything from a place that was never meant for it. The place is still there, the signs are still there. At the upper threshold of the trail, each one marked with the same circle and the same 3 descending lines, recording every crew that has passed them and has not understood what was being recorded. And whatever marked us on the first morning we walked through those signs has not stopped watching since the 3rd of October. I do not know if there is still time.